So welcome. I am very excited to be here. This is actually my second time to present at Lady Charts, and I just think this conference is so amazing because it's this really unique blend that I don't know if there's any other conference that really just emphasizes women health and data the way that this one does. So I feel very, very fortunate to be a part of it. And then Dr. Ross was incredible. So that was a delight to get to listen to her. So I feel in very high spirits today, even though there's a lot of other things going on. And to mention that, I know there's probably kids in your household, maybe your power could be going in and out, freezing pipes, all that. So I really just appreciate you being here and choosing to spend your time and energy in this moment with me. And I really hope that we'll have a great conversation. And if anything happens and you're not able to be here the whole time, just feel free to reach out. I love coffee talks. So I'm happy to have one with you if something happens and we don't get to connect as long as this whole hour. So I just like to kick us off. I love to know who's in the room. So if you could just drop your name, your organization, position, title, if you like, and what do you really hope to learn today? You chose this breakout room, so I just really love to know why, and hopefully we'll meet expectations here. And then also, I should say, I have a little coworker here with me today, so excuse any interruptions and please give some grace. Okay, great. It's hard for me to see the chat too, so I'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. So I thought I would just start us off with giving a little bit of history with Thrive. So we were formed in 2016, and we function as a backbone for a collective impact initiative focusing on adolescent sexual health, which is a mouthful. But essentially, there's a lot of different ways to collaborate, and collective impact is just a framework to do that. And it has certain tenets within it. And one of those is a backbone organization. So that's what Thrive does. We don't do any direct service. We just focus on facilitating connections, keeping our mission and vision of the collaboration front of mind for everybody. And so we currently have about 33 partner organizations representing 72 individuals that are committed collaboration members. And then we have some that kind of engage with us on different levels beyond that. And I work as the Senior Director of Data and Evaluation. I've worked in private, I've worked in public, and this is my first stint in nonprofit, and I absolutely love it. We have a couple different federal grants. We have an internal evaluation plan that I help execute. And then just pretty much any other evaluation activities that pop up, I get to work on. So that's really exciting. And the most important thing that I think you need to know about me is that I absolutely love Schitt's Creek. And so I have to incorporate that in every presentation I do. So I'm sure most people are pretty Zoom savvy at this point. So if you go and hover up at the top of your screen, there should be a little black box that comes down and you have that annotate feature. If you click on that and then pick a stamp that, is your fancy, whatever that could be, and just kind of click on this little continuum here. When you hear the word evaluation, how does that make you feel? Is it, boo, get away from me, I hate that? Is it, okay, I maybe see the purpose, but it's really confusing? Or is it, I love it, I'm so into it? So I see some hearts coming up. And if you take nothing else away from this presentation, please watch Schitt's Creek because it's an amazing show and it's definitely binge worthy. So I highly recommend it. Yay, I figured that we might kind of be a little skewed here because I think if you're at this conference, you maybe have a little bit of love for data. Got some wild lines going on. Okay, but it's mostly Myra, so that's great. Okay, so I'm gonna clear this and we can go on to the next and kind of start getting into the meat of things because we got a lot to cover. So I wanted to start off with some broad categories with strategic learning, or essentially a learning culture and accountability. This really feeds into the quality of evaluation work that you do, especially with collaborative work. And Emma's going to drop a worksheet or link to a worksheet in the chat. And that's really just some facilitation questions. The great thing about evaluation is there's a lot of set tools, but there's also a lot of flexibility around how you execute evaluation and the needs of your evaluation. So really these questions are here just to bring this information closer to home to your initiative and help you think through some of these principles that I'm talking about. So if it works best for you to fill this out as we go, that's fantastic. If it's better for you to put it to the side and maybe fill it out and as you process later, that's great too. If you need it for kindling, if your heater goes out, you can use it for that too. So whatever works best. So I wanted to kick us off with this quote. I absolutely love it. So learning culture is defined. Oh, we still have some annotate there. Okay, there we go. We'll see if it stays off or not. A learning culture is defined as one in which people know how to learn and freely share what they know and are willing to change based on the acquisition of new knowledge. I love this quote, and it seems very duh, of course, but there are 3 steps really in here that aren't so simple, especially in collaborative work. So you have to know how to learn. So that includes what questions need to be asked, what data do you need, how do you get that data, and then you have to share that information. So that includes you have to be willing to share it and understand how to communicate it out in a way that resonates with a lot of different audiences. And then sometimes the biggest struggle is that last part. You have to be willing to change based on what you learned. So there are some things that can kind of help facilitate a learning culture. And these are the principles. I kind of tried to roll them up as best as possible. But the first one is definitely trust. A lot of times evaluation is viewed as an expensive and time-consuming rod that's used to correct people and batter them down into where you think they should be. It's kind of gotten a bad rap with some groups, unfortunately. So when you collaborate with data, in order to establish that learning culture, you really have to build that trust at the forefront where this data will do no harm. So it's not meant to attack any organization or individual. It's really there to help enhance, build capacity, and highlight things that are working or that areas that need to pivot. And what helps with that is when there's value behind that data. So you know that the data is valuable, that the data was collected with integrity, it was collected correctly and without bias. And then these 2 principles build on each other to openness. So this directly builds off the first 2 points. It requires that people are vulnerable to accept sometimes the data is telling them that things might be contrary to how they feel. So I think a lot of people in nonprofit get into this work not because they want to be billionaires, because they're really passionate about the work. And that's so incredible. That's very different from a lot of other areas that people get into. But it also sometimes that passion leads to a little bit of blind spots around work because they are so passionate about it. They maybe lose some of that objectivity. So it's really important to have all these components kind of build on each other. So there is this openness, there is this vulnerability that when data comes back in collaborative work, that people are open to pivoting, that they're open to changing the way that they view things. And then the next one is collaboration. So one thing that I think is so important is not just letting data people analyze the data. From the development of tools to collecting the data, all the way to analyzing the data, people with lived experiences and professionals in their own respective areas have something to contribute to the interpretation of that data because they're going to interpret it anyways when they get that report or when they see that data point. And so really in a learning culture, what you want is to get everybody of diverse backgrounds and participation into the same room, sharing those perspectives and learning from each other with an evaluator guiding the conversations framework. And that's when you really see the magic happen. So then the last one is equity. In all things data, equity. It's so important that there's equity in your data. I often say, and I think maybe I could be biased and I recognize that, but really equity does begin with data, deaggregating data, your collection of data. And I feel very strongly that, evaluators have a very important responsibility to ensure that data is in every single data set that they collect, but then especially in collaborative work where you're touching so many areas, you have to ensure that equity really shines through. And data is used for storytelling. And if voices are left out or if voices are combined or aggregated, you're missing crucial pieces in your learning culture. So all of these feed into that learning kind of culture, here are some specific tools that you can use to help facilitate that. These are not all the tools. These are just some of the tools, some of my favorite. The first one being learning questions. I think they're amazing. So really you develop learning questions in a collaborative environment. And what they're supposed to do is when you get data back, it's supposed to help you dig past that surface level information and get into the real grit of what that data means and giving that layered context. And again, that's why the collaboration of data analysis is so important with a lot of diverse perspectives. Theory of change, actor and asset mapping, community assessment. These are all kind of more higher level, maybe system level ways to help enhance strategic learning in a collaborative. Listening sessions, surveys and interviews, probably everybody's pretty familiar with those. Plan, do, study, acts, and rosebud thorn. Those are continuous quality improvement exercises that I really like. So again, these just aren't all the tools, but I wanted to throw a few out there. So now we're going to shift to accountability. And this kind of makes people feel uncomfortable sometimes, but that's okay. Live in the uncomfortable with me while we work through this. Accountability is commonly, at its core, associated with mistrust. And that's really in contrast to a learning culture where it's all about trust and relationships. So we really have to shift that accountability narrative. And I think this quote does a really good job of giving an overview of that. So accountability needs to shift from achieving predetermined results on a predetermined plan to demonstrating the capacity to achieve results in dynamic environments. I don't know if we have any funders logged on here, but don't log off yet because you can have great accountability without even bringing results in sometimes, because allowing accountability to be focused on doing the best job and not always the pre-agreed on job sometimes produces much, much better results. So there are some components in that give accountability kind of a positive twist, and they should look very familiar because they're the same as learning culture. So with trust, again, the evaluation should be viewed as a carrot, not a stick. And if someone isn't thriving, the response shouldn't be an attack of why aren't you doing this, but how can we help you do this? And evaluation should really be a big support in that. And again, if there's value to the data, it helps build trust and helps people be more open and have that willingness to pivot. And then for the collaboration, though, that kind of takes a different shift. Collaboration should be an accountability very open and transparent. There should be very clear expectations when it comes to evaluation and collaborative efforts and the accountability that goes along with that. And everybody should be at the table when those milestones are marked of what that should really look like in collaborative work. And that really goes into the next point of equity. So not all organizations or partners can be held to the same standards at all times. Because with collaborative work, there has to be a lot of flexibility because a big hospital is not going to have the same capacity, the same regulations, the same staff as a little mom and pop shop clinic. And so you really have to take that into consideration when you're looking at what these evaluation accountability markers are going to be and ensure that they are a good fit for every single person who's contributing to the work. So nobody likes to kind of be the heavy and be the accountability, person. And so really with collaborative work, there's a lot of different tools that you can use to set up accountability where one person isn't the heavy, it's spread out. Everybody has committed and bought into this idea. And Thrive actually has all of these, but I don't know if they're necessary for every collaborative to have all of these, but they're a really great kind of list to check off that might be helpful for you. So a comprehensive plan, again, that's great when you can collaboratively come together and decide what your goals are going to be for the next year, 3 years, 5 years. I wouldn't go, beyond that. And especially in this climate, maybe a year is even getting a little ambitious. But if you can get together and you know exactly what your collaborative is going to be working on, people can then kind of opt in and opt out based on best fit for them. I don't know why I struggled with that so much. So they're able to kind of see the work that they're doing in their capacity and being able to see how it fits into the grand scheme of things. So the next is guiding principles. This is a really great way to filter some people out that might not be a great fit for the collaborative, especially when it comes to the work that they're doing that you might be evaluating, and you don't want them to essentially skew your results or do no harm sort of thing. So with Thrive, we have, we're inclusive. Well, what does that really mean? Because we've definitely had some people come like, oh, I'm so inclusive, but just, I don't serve those people. And then we're like, oh, that's not inclusive. And so, if you're not an LGBTQ plus advocate, this probably isn't a great fit for you. If you're not medically accurate, if you're non-shaming, then this is probably not a great fit for you. So this is a really great way for people to kind of opt in and out of the work that they would be potentially doing. So for the structure, we actually have just done a structure redo for us that was really helpful when it came to evaluation in our collaborative work. We've gotten from evaluation, we got some feedback that some people were really struggling with their place in the collaborative and the type of work that they were doing and where it exactly fit and what's the chain of communication and command and how are decisions made and who does that. And so we got together collaboratively to roll out a structure that kind of gives a very streamlined view of where everybody fits. If maybe you don't buy into all the guiding principles, but you're still contributing to the work, there's a place for you, but it may not be at the core, and that's okay. So you can just go where you feel the most comfortable. And then that makes sure that their work is falling in to the appropriate evaluation as well. The next is mission and vision. So that's really broad and high level, but it's always a great spot check when you're planning on your evaluation of, does this activity get us closer to the mission or vision, or does it get us further away? And sometimes just even asking that question is like, maybe this isn't the right time, or this isn't the right thing to really move us towards that, and we need to pivot. And then the last is, of course, is funder and grant expectations. So sometimes you just have, to appease the gods, whether that's federal or whatever that is, you might have those expectations. And of course, those need to be clearly outlined. So now we're going to go into different types of evaluation. So there's lots of different types of evaluation. So I kind of roll them up into 3 groups, knowing that there's a lot of subgroups under that. And then there's a lot of evaluation that falls outside of that. But when we're looking at collaborative evaluation, I felt like these were probably the most often that people would touch on. So hopefully they're inclusive enough. But what does evaluation of collaborative work look like? So if you could picture just one word in your head and you think of collaborative evaluation, what would that be? For me, I get to cheat and do a lot of different words, but for me, it's collective, it's complex, it's iterative, it's illuminating, it's creative. Most of all, it's really messy, it's flexible, you have to pivot a lot. And so I think when you think of your evaluation type, you have to think of that and really ensure that the type of evaluation that you're picking fits into whatever word kind of pops up for you in your collaborative. And then there's so much with so many different partners contributing over a lot of different areas. If you're doing collaborative work, more than likely you're trying to tackle a really complex problem. And so because of that, it's really easy to go, well, what should we focus on? And there's actually going to be a great breakout room tomorrow, which I'm really excited about. I think it's called Beyond the Birth Rate or something like that. But I mean, when you're going to evaluate collaborative work, it's like, where do you even get started? So for me, and I'll preface this with a lot of this information is from FSG, so don't feel like I came up with it all. I just kind of consolidated it and put it into our evaluation plan with my own stuff. So, but the first is the initiative's context. So really that looks at community, culture, historic, the history, the demographic, socioeconomic, geographic, economic factors, anything that goes into why your community looks like it does. And community is always changing, so we have to be continually monitoring it. So some learning questions that we have in our collaborative, and we have a lot, but so I just picked out a few, is what changes have happened in your community and what new actors have emerged in your context, and how does the community view your work? So these are just some examples of some things that you could be monitoring within your community. Some tools that you could use are community assessment, listening sessions, census data review, actor mapping. These are all really helpful in understanding your initiative's context. And for you, that could be a zip code, that could be a county, that could be a state, so your community could be a wide variety of things. So the next area that I typically focus on with collaborative work is the initiative's components and activities. So especially in collaborative work, sometimes it's hard to understand what everyone's truly doing. And this would really be how your initiative is functioning. So that vertical, horizontal communication, flexibility, capacity, learning culture, accountability, these are all so important because the power of collective work is really in your initiative. It's really how it's functioning and being able to work together and coordinate that work. So that's really where the power and where you start to see that kind of complex change happen. And so it's so important to keep really good evaluation tabs on how your initiative's functioning. But I'm presuming you have to go out.
It's an emergency.
Okay, I'm so sorry. Hold on one second.
Emergency.
But if you're not hurt, you need to go.
I am hurt.
Okay, hold on. I'm so sorry.
No worries at all. We all understand. I'm sure this will just take a minute, but if you all have children or dogs or pipes that are freezing in the background, this might be a good moment to go attend to that as well. But we'll just give Sharia a couple moments.
Okay, we got a scraped elbow, but we're okay. Thank you. Okay, so what pivots did you have? So something that you can monitor is what pivots did you have this year? How did the initiative react to them? Are you going in the right direction? What were the activities that you chose? Were they the appropriate ones? And what significant accomplishments has your initiative done to date or this year, and why? So some tools that you can use there are appreciative inquiries, the consolidated framework of implementation survey, meeting survey feedback, asset and actor mappings in an internal sense, interorganizational network analysis, and annual look backs. Those are all really great tools in understanding how your initiative is functioning. So the next one is if you're trying to tackle a complex problem, more than likely you're interacting in a lot of different systems. So this really looks at how individual behavior impacts the system and vice versa. Funding flows, cultural, normal policy changes. Normally, if you're trying to you could be operating in several different systems, and how you interact with those systems and how those systems interact with you is really important to understand. So you can monitor how has the initiative impacted the systems that you operate in, what system barriers are keeping the initiative from success. And some different tools for that is policy analysis, system leader interviews, egocentric analysis survey, asset and actor mapping on a broader system level, funding tracking, and system map. So the last one is impact, which is probably where most minds go to. So that's a population level outcomes, the comprehensive plan outcomes, whatever, how you outline your goal and mission and vision. So most people would think, well, obviously, yeah, I need to monitor this. But really, if those other three components are well monitored and are functioning at a high level, you're going to see the trickle down into impacts. So if you put those focus and energy there, you really will see the impacts. So here you can monitor what was the initiative's focus this year, what progress did you make, who is experiencing success and in what areas, and what are some unintended outcomes that your initiative work has produced that you weren't expecting. So next, I think this is really great to take all this and then move it to the next slide where you're really looking at where your initiative is in its lifespan, because that's really going to affect what type of evaluation you use. So again, a lot of this information is from FSG, just want to preface with that. But when FSG talks about evaluating collective impact, which is again, just a framework for collaborative work, it really asks you first to think about where your initiative is in its lifespan. So the early years is about establishing and integrating core principles, values, missions, and visions, and starting to coordinate implementation and activities. And the evaluation should focus on the feedback for the initiative's infrastructure and development and helping partners understand their initiative's context and process. So some words that could be used to explain this are exploring, creating, emerging. It's really the baby years. So for middle years, data should be focused on learning if, where, and for whom the initiative is having success. The evaluation really should be focused on refinement and improvement and fine-tuning the work. And you should be able to start to have a repeatable model that can be controlled for. So some words for this lifespan area is improving, enhancing, and standardizing. And lastly, for the later years, the initiative should be ready for some sort of rigorous evaluation to assess its impact and merit and significance and value. So some words to describe this would be established, mature, predictable. So I also want to say there's no timestamp on this. So just because your initiative is 5 years old doesn't mean it should be in the middle years or the later years. Or if it's 1 year old and you're like, well, the middle years is really what feels right, then you could be in the middle years. So, and different parts of your initiative could be in also different places and could require different types of evaluation. So I just want to note that as well. So next we're going to be moving on and really looking at some different types of evaluation that kind of correspond to these years. But again, your initiative could have different pieces in different places and you might need to use different types of evaluation. So I know there's, again, like I said, a lot of different types of evaluation. These are just the 3 that I kind of picked as roll-up categories. So developmental really looks at what is happening. Formative, how is it happening? And summative is what difference did it make? So developmental uses data to identify how a model meets the needs of different people at different points in time. Formative uses data to test and stabilize a model during a pilot period. And summative uses data to understand how a model works against a predetermined set of outcomes. What we know about systems is that they are nonlinear. They are complex, they're ever changing, so it really doesn't help a lot sometimes to measure success with a linear predictive model like formative and summative. So these are kind of how I outline the differences between them. Really, developmental is focused on learning with real-time feedback and adjustments. It's very flexible and it has some sort of North Star that oftentimes changes, like a comprehensive plan that may be for 5 years and then changes. With formative and summative, it's all about models. It's all about having a clear linear chain of cause and effect. It's normally based on a pretty stagnant fixed plan or logic model, and it's measuring success based on predetermined outcomes. So I'm going to spend most of my time on developmental because formative and summative are a little bit more common. Developmental evaluation is a concept that's relatively new for the evaluation world. It was made popular by Michael Quinn Patton in 2010. And I cited his book on that worksheet as well. If you want to dig into it, it's a great book. But it's been embraced by several large organizations, including Tamarack, FSG, and Stanford as the go-to when measuring system-level social innovation. And it really supports an adaptation in a really complex environment. So it's perfect, I think, for collaborative work, depending on where your initiative is and what your evaluation needs are. It's essentially a context analysis, really focusing on feedback loops that are frequent and timely, learning facilitation that's intentional, that's setting aside intentional time to really reflect on the data and ask questions and identify challenges and assumptions and make pivots, and then ongoing sense making, essentially. So when would you use developmental evaluation? Well, I think whatever your initiative's lifespan should be taken into consideration. And then also here are some additional examples of when you might want to use developmental evaluation. So when actions and results of actions are nonlinear and have multiple compound effects, patterns emerge, but you really can't tell from what. There's dynamic interactions with actors that vary quite often with intensity and regularity. And then actors adapt as they respond and interact with each other. Processes are not certain to produce specific outcomes, and interdependent actors co-evolve alongside of each other. So really, instead of focusing on achieving a specific set of outcomes, developmental evaluation delivers information and learning that furthers implementators' understanding of their role in the complex environment and the way that their intervention affects that environment. So at Thrive, we have a saying that's relationships over results. And really what that focuses on is if you have really good relationships, those are the results are going to come. So in that kind of same spirit, this is looking at context over outcomes. So knowing outcomes is great, but if we don't understand everything that's contributing to those outcomes and how we can still achieve that outcome if the system shifts, we're really missing out the point of collaborative evaluation. So there's some other differences too between formative and summative when it comes to developmental. So the first is the embedded evaluator versus impartial evaluator. So with formative and summative, evaluators are supposed to be neutral. They're supposed to be removed. Whereas with developmental, the evaluator is a support and a learning piece. They're supposed to be integral into the collaborative initiative, whatever that might be. And another difference is, sorry, excuse me. Another difference is the facilitation. So the participants analyze the data with the facilitation of an evaluator, so that the evaluator really gives them the framework for the conversation, versus formative and summative. A lot of times the evaluator is impartial, they're removed, they write a report with all the results, they hand it over and they say, farewell. So with developmental, with an embedded evaluator, they help facilitate the conversation around data, kind of like what we were talking about before. Another difference is that double loop learning versus single loop learning. So with single loop learning really focuses on getting information and modifying your action to accommodate that new information. So it's really problem detection and correction, kind of like a thermostat. So if something's too hot, something's too cold, you get it back on to whatever that temperature is supposed to be. So with double loop learning, it involves the same principle of getting you back onto the right course, but then it goes a step further out of identifying, well, why did that happen? Is there a draft? Is something not sealed up correctly that's causing the temperature to get off? Is the air conditioner not working? Does it need more Freon? So it's really looking at whatever's contributing to that problem, and let's go at that source and fix it, rather than just adjusting things with a kind of a thermostat view. And the last is the strategic thinking versus the strategic planning. So this really looks at how you plan, understanding that systems are always moving and shifting. It's really hard sometimes to have these really detailed strategic plans. So with strategic thinking, it's about really leaving room for those emergent ideas and watching things to come up from the data and interacting with those. And kind of, like I said, having that North Star that's a little bit more flexible than those outline models. So obviously I love my quotes. Here's another one. More than any other evaluation approach, developmental evaluation requires a healthy dose of humility, an admission that we can't possibly predict every outcome of our client's work, nor is there one silver bullet for solving system-wide imbalances and inequities. I absolutely love that quote, and just, to dumb it down for myself, what I really take away from that is bring all your expertise to the table, but really just leave your assumptions at the door and let those emerging truths be a topic of conversation from the data, especially with collective work and really dynamic systems. So I'm just going to touch really quickly on formative and summative. If you go in and you Google those, you'll have more information than you ever need. That will probably be much smarter than I am. But I just really wanted to touch base on developmental because that is a little bit newer topic to the evaluation table, especially with collaborative work. So with formative evaluation, like I said, as a broad umbrella, it could be needs assessment, feasibility assessment, implementation evaluation, process evaluation. Formative really just exists to help test and refine a model that you've put together. So when would you use formative evaluation? There's a model that can be explained, and components can be somewhat and consistently quantified and codified. There are measurable causes and effects that can be evaluated on their own or independently. Patterns have emerged that can be identified clearly and replicated. The actors that impact the evaluation are known and their interactions fall into the model's framework, and external factors can be mitigated to isolate the effect of the model. So with summative evaluations, normally they're the most expensive and time consuming and are intended to provide a package of your model that can be replicated and has shown effectiveness against some predetermined outcomes. And there's a lot of different types of summative. There's outcomes evaluation, which is probably the most well-known, impact, empowerment, there's economic, secondary, there's quite a bit of different types of evaluation. And it really addresses the question of how have lives, communities, whatever your target audience is, how are they different because of the initiative that you did? And I'm going to give my little 2-cent opinion here, so take it for that. But a lot of organizations really strive to get to this summative point, and they sink a lot of money and time into it. But when you're working with a community, a main component of summative is everything kind of has to stay the same. And so that's really sometimes a disservice to the community when they look so different or they're pivoting. And so I just always encourage initiatives when they get to that point where they're thinking about doing a summative to really step back and think, why are we doing this? What will it give us? What will it give our community? What will it give our colleagues? And if, the answer is those positive things, that's great, go for it. But always just think, if you're working in a lot of dynamic environments, if you have this set model that everything has to be done so to stick to fidelity to achieve those evaluation results, is it the best thing to spend your money on? So that's just a conversation that I always encourage any collective who's thinking about doing summative to think about. So when would you use summative? When you have desired short and long-term outcomes, the learning phase is done, closed up shop, no more changes. You know what your model is and you're sticking with it. The model shows promise in various environments and conditions. The actors, their interactions and impacts can be isolated and studied. The initiative is currently achieving its objectives, and the model can be implemented in a stable environment, and the initiative has the appropriate time and money to invest in a rigorous evaluation, because they aren't cheap. But if you have the time, you want to make sure that you have the time and the money if you want to do one, to do an appropriate one. So now I'm going to touch on shared measures. So when I joined Thrive, we had a set of shared measures, and I've learned so much about collective impact and the power of shared measures. And this is one of the tenets of collective impact. But I think really any collaborative work should have shared measures to monitor your impact and its success, and to ensure that the collective is moving the needle in the way that you think it is. So there are a lot of purposes for shared measures beyond just impact. One of these is storytelling. So we know that every single collaboration, every single initiative, they have a story to tell, and it's a really important one. This story includes your successes and struggles that's captured by evaluation and data. And it's used to begin a conversation with funders and the community to really show your power of the initiative and also to demonstrate additional needs. So really, data is such an important component of storytelling, and a good marketing person too. So your data and your marketing person should be best buds. So strategic learning is a key part. Obviously, we've talked quite a bit about that. All of us are operating in really dynamic systems, as I said, and they're constantly changing. So it's really imperative to use intentional learning with evaluation to accommodate those changing. And then pivoting, but learning isn't enough. As you know better, the initiative needs to be committed to doing better and acting on that data. So you really need to build intentional conversations and activities with the initiative member, facilitated by an evaluator, to enhance the understanding of that data and being able to make really thoughtful choices and decisions for the collective. And then lastly, impact. We always want to know that we're making an impact, whether that's at a system or population level. There's lots of ways to measure success, and you have to discover really what success looks like for your initiative. So these are some tips and tricks that I have picked up from shared measures. Is make it very collaborative from the start. People get weird about their data. That's like the best way I can say it. They really do. And I think that there's sometimes that it's that distrust component of, oh, you're looking at our data, you're looking for mistakes that we made or how many widgets that we made, and maybe we didn't make enough widgets, so it's really important to have all those components that I talked about before, about the trust, the value, the openness, but also making it collaborative from the start, where people are writing the measures that they put in there is really important. Understanding their data system is also important. Are they paper or pen? What's their reporting lag? How often, do they get data? That's all what capacity they have to pull data. So that's all really important of understanding when you're talking to your partners of really what does their data system look like for them. And then I always say build the relationships first, because again, people are weird about their data. So if they don't see you as someone who's coming in with a rod, but really just someone who's genuinely interested in their work, and you're there to help their work, enhance it, help build capacity, that you're a teammate, that really changes the dialogue completely. Keep them simple, because a lot of people are like, ooh, data. Yes, get all the data. Sometimes having too much data is worse than having no data, because when you get too much data, it's very easy to go off the track into bunny trails that eat up time and money that are not appropriate for what your initiative's doing. So it's really important that you just keep them simple so that your partners are able to consistently contribute to them. You're getting good data, and it's focusing on really your mission and vision or your comprehensive plan, whatever your North Star might be. And then this is really important. Meet with the decision makers and the data nerds together. And I say data nerd lovingly, I am one. But I've been in many situations where you get with that CEO and you're sitting down and they're like, yes, we can get you that information, no problem. And then you meet with the data tech or the data analysis, they're like, you don't have that information, or that information's 10 years old, or that data doesn't say what that CEO thinks it's saying. And then, and vice versa, if you just meet with a data analyst, sometimes they don't have the authorization power to give you access to certain things, or maybe they don't understand the initiative's ultimate vision or goal that they're moving in because they're really in the weeds all the time, and so it's really important to kind of get them both in the room when you have that conversation. It will save you so much time if that's, besides the Schitt's Creek thing, if that's the only other thing you take away from this presentation, please do. And then another thing is make it an opt-in. So like I said, with that structure, you can have different levels of commitment and engagement. So you really want people to not feel forced to contribute. You want them to contribute because they see the value in it. They see how it's helping the collective work. And so if you're not just forcing them to give you your data, it's a lot different dynamic when they opt in and say, yeah, I want to be a part of this. And then think how that data is telling the story, which kind of also goes back to that keep it simple thing. What story are you trying to tell, and how do these shared measures contribute to that? So if you're over here in left field collecting data that really has nothing to do with your initiative story, you probably need to pivot and move in a different direction. So really think of the story you want to tell when you have all that data. And then set up boundaries. This is really hard for those big thinkers, but you only have so much capacity, you only have so much time. So you really need to say, we're going to focus on this and not this. And maybe it's just a not today, not forever sort of thing. You may circle back around, but you really have to set up boundaries and say, okay, we're not looking at this for this data. We're really focusing on this. So an evaluator's role, most people think, is a data gatherer. But honestly, we have so many other roles beyond that. And some of these I was really giddy as I came up with, so I'm going to read them, so just indulge me. But a burr in the stagnation saddle, an equity lens optometrist, an emergent observer, living feedback mechanism, a mouthpiece for those who can't speak, a teammate, a light for the program's shadows. So these are all things that we as evaluators do as we collect our data. And it's so important, just beyond getting that data point and putting it in a report and giving it to someone else, especially with collective work. All these roles are so important, and it's a role that evaluators are supposed to serve. So we can do all this by setting up that learning culture, by having positive accountability, by focusing on key areas of our initiative, understanding where our initiative is in its lifespan, by choosing the appropriate evaluation type, and collecting shared measures that tell the initiative story, help guide the initiative, and show its impact.